Welcome back to AHA Parenting, where we share the secrets of happy parents. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Markham. Joining us today is Alfie Kohn, who writes and speaks widely on human behavior, education, and parenting. Kohn has been described in Time magazine as perhaps the country's most outspoken critic of education's fixation on grades and test scores. His criticisms of competition and rewards have helped to shape the thinking of educators as well as parents across the country and abroad. Most recently, Alfie's been taking some heat in the press for his stand against timeouts, but he's often in the media, having been featured on hundreds of TV and radio programs, including The Today Show and Oprah. Many of Alfie's books are in education, and I'm hoping we can get him back on the show sometime to talk about education. But today we're focusing on parenting, and his book, The Unconditional Parenting, Moving from Rewards and Punishment to Love and Reason, and Punished by Rewards, The Trouble with Gold Stars, Incentive Plans, A's, Praise, and Other Bribes. Alfie, welcome to Secrets of Happy Parents. I'm so glad you could join us.
Nice to be here.
Well, I have been following you in the news again lately, taking some heat for your willingness to challenge conventional parenting approaches. Tell us what's wrong with our usual parenting practices.
Well, in a nutshell, they tend to be focused more on how to get short-term compliance, answering the question, how do I get my kid to do what I want him to do, rather than on our long-term goals for the kind of people we hope our children will grow into. And as a result of the focus on short-term obedience, we tend to use variations of bribes and threats, rewards and punishments to control kids, when it turns out that not only does that not work in the short and medium term, but it makes it less likely that kids will grow into caring, compassionate, happy, ethical, responsible people.
So you're saying that it's actually counterproductive to use the approaches that most parents today use in Western culture?
That's right. It's not just ineffective, it's counterproductive. So, for example, we find that kids who have punitive consequences enforced, you do this, or here's how I'm going to make you suffer, with timeouts and grounding and loss of privileges and scoldings and spankings, all of this gets kids to be more self-centered. So they're now asking the question, what do I have to do and what happens to me if I don't do it? Rather than focusing on why it might make sense to do this rather than that. Not to mention the fact that our relationships with kids, which is the most important feature of parenting, our relationships become warped and strained. And every time parents lay out consequences, here's what you have to do or else, kids tend to be about as happy to see us coming as we would be to see a police car in our rear view mirror. The flip side of this, rewards, is where we're saying to kids, in effect, if you do this, I will give you that, where we dangle goodies in front of them, stickers, gold stars, desserts, or even sometimes just a verbal goodie like, good job. And now kids come to see us as goodie dispensers on legs, not as caring allies. Rewards and punishments are not opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. But that coin doesn't buy very much, and it actually does a fair amount of damage.
So I thought that we were supposed to reward the positive behavior we see in our kids and, give them positive attention when they do something we like. Is there any place where that's appropriate? Tell us about acknowledging a child versus praise.
Well, let me take the first part of the question.
Mm-hmm.
What you have described has been framed by one researcher as sugar-coated control. What kids need from us, in addition to guidance and support and feedback, what they most need from us is not just love, but unconditional love. They need to know that even when they screw up or fall short, we still care about them. In other words, that they are loved for who they are, not for what they do. the most destructive thing you can do with a child with respect to the love issue is to make the love something they have to earn. Now, in that context, we can understand love withdrawal techniques like timeout, which feels to the child like the care is being strategically withdrawn until the child obeys, does whatever we want. And conversely, what you just described, positive reinforcement, is conditional love. It's not just different from what kids need, it's the opposite. It's our saying to children, only when you impress me, only when you're well-behaved, only when you jump through my hoops and do what I want, will I say, good job, I really like the way you... Only then do we give them the high fives and the big smiles and the hugs. And that's poison. Most parents who do this aren't doing it to be destructive of children or to be conditional parents. They're doing it because they have never been invited, in most cases, to reflect on how children need that unconditional support. Again, that's not to say we don't intervene when they do something wrong or that we don't express enthusiasm when we're pleased with them. But if they come to see our reaction as the point, then they're not interested so much in reading a book, in drawing a picture, in sharing and helping someone else for its own sake. Now those activities are just a means to an end, and the goal is to get our approval. So kids get hooked on the praise. That's why, in answer to the last part of your question, we have to think hard not just about the way we're expressing enthusiasm and support. We have to think about our goals, because if the objective in acknowledging a child is to make the kid do it again, in crude terms, to reinforce the behavior as if we were training a puppy, then it doesn't matter what words we use. The kid understands at some level he or she is being manipulated, and that is not good for our relationship or the child's growth.
So really, what you're talking about is what happens long-term to our kids.
Yes.
Yes, you may be able to control their behavior in the immediate moment, positively or negatively, but what you're really talking about is the ultimate lesson they're learning and who they're becoming long-term from this. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that and how do kids become who they are based on what you're describing as the normal parenting behavior.
Yes, it is all about the long term. When I do a workshop with parents, or for teachers for that matter, I almost always begin by asking, what are your long-term goals for your child? How do you hope your kid will turn out, even after he or she has moved away? And everywhere I go, I get the same kind of answers. Rural, urban, suburban communities, teachers, administrators, parents, people tend to say, I want my kid to be happy, to be ethical, to be good decision makers, to be critical thinkers, lifelong learners, caring, ethical, that sort of thing. And so then what I do, and this is what I do for a living in my books and in my lectures, is basically to say to people, you say you want this, so how come you're doing that? Mm-hmm. And then what we have to ask is, given what your long-term goal is, what do we know about what helps? And what do we know about what hurts? And much of what hurts turns out to be the conventional wisdom, the garbage you get from shows like Super Nanny, the stuff that you find with 2/3 at least of the books in a parenting section of a bookstore, or the syndicated columnists who write on parenting issues. Most of those people are not asking the question, how do we help kids to become happy, healthy human beings, and how do we meet their needs? They're asking the question, how do we make kids do what we tell them to do? And so we have to understand that this is not just about finding a new technique. It's about making sure that what we do with our kids on a given Thursday morning is likely to be consistent with the long-term objective. So, for example, let's say we hope our kids will not just be self-centered, that they will grow into people who will be genuinely concerned about the well-being of others.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that has certain implications for what we don't do, as well as what we do. For example, if we wanted kids to be genuinely concerned about others' well-being, we would never praise them for sharing. Good job, Diana. I really like the way you shared your brownie with Melissa. You're such a good sharer. 2 studies have found that kids who are treated that way with a verbal doggy biscuit for helping tend to be less helpful and caring than other kids.
Oh, my goodness.
They've learned that the reason to help isn't to make Melissa happy, it's to get that reaction from Mommy. And so when Mommy's not around, they have less interest in helping than they did to begin with.
Oh, my goodness. That's so great. So these are some studies that were done.
Oh, yeah, this is that stuff I thought up in the shower this morning. I mean, there's a rich empirical tradition that completely challenges the behaviorist assumptions about, offering rewards or reinforcers to human beings in terms of, for example, if you give kids a prize of some kind for reading a book, and kids learn, if I read this number of books, I'll get points, I'll get pizza, I'll get prizes of different kinds, you can almost watch children's interest in the books themselves evaporate before your eyes. Because now the book itself is something that is less valued than it was to begin with. And of course, the kid will pick the shortest possible book because you've taught the kid the point here isn't reading. The point here is to get the goodie. You just got to get through the book to get the goodie. Books are things you wouldn't want to read on your own, just like you wouldn't share with somebody again if there's nobody to pat you on the head for it and say, good job.
So this is fascinating, this research, and I have heard some of it, but can you tell us more about the kinds of research that you're seeing that supports I know you've had these theories for a long time, and you've also seen the empirical evidence showing up to support them. Tell us about those studies.
Well, they vary. There's quite a number of them. I've mentioned a couple having to do with generosity at this point. Let me mention another one that's sort of analogous to it. This has to do with food. A study was done in which little kids were asked to drink an unfamiliar beverage. It happened to be something called kefir, which is like liquid yogurt. Mm-hmm. And the children were divided into 3 groups. The first group were just asked to drink the stuff. The second were praised for drinking it. Good job, you got all the way down to the bottom of the glass. And the third group was promised free movie tickets if they drank. Mm-hmm. Okay, first question. Is it the case that offering the reward would get kids who got the praise or the movie tickets to drink more? And the answer is yes, because rewards, like punishments, can get you one thing sometimes, and that is temporary compliance. I mean, if I gave you $1,000 right now for taking off your shoes, I think you'd probably do it. See,
right.
The rewards work, in quotes, just like punishments do if they're severe enough, and the likelihood of their being used is great enough. But what the researchers wanted to know was, how did the kids feel about this beverage a week later? Well, the kids who were not given any reward liked it a little more than they had to begin with, not a lot more. But the kids who got the movie tickets and the kids who were praised for drinking it no longer wanted to touch the stuff. Same kind of kids in each group, exactly the same beverage. The only thing that was different was a tangible or verbal reward for doing it. And as soon as you offer that reward, whatever kids were rewarded to do comes to be seen as less appealing than it did before. So that's just one of many, many studies that I review in my book, Punished by Rewards. These lessons apply to the classroom, which is why the best schools never give grades. because kids who are trying to get a good report card almost always tend to be less interested in the learning itself. And these lessons even apply in the workplace, because it turns out that treating employees like pets, it not only is bad for their quality of life, but bad for the quality of work they do.
Now, let's go back to the research on timeouts. Is there actually research on timeouts that shows what kids learn from it or how they develop once you use timeouts as a standard management tool with your kids growing up?
There's not much research on it, at least that has been done in the last 20 or 30 years. A psychologist named Martin Hoffman did some research and wrote about it and helped us to see that for little kids, timeout can be in some ways even crueler than other kinds of punishments, because the kid doesn't know why he's bad or when mommy is coming back. And there is this powerful fear of the loss of parental love and care. To the extent timeout works to get obedience, that's why it works, but at a terrific cost.
Right.
These days, when you look in psychology journals and you read articles about timeout, they typically are classified under the heading love withdrawal. In fact, the phrase time out was originally short for time out from positive reinforcement. And it was used as a technique for suppressing certain behaviors in laboratory animals. You know, they would try to train rats to run a maze or press a bar, and then they would see if it worked to give the rat a timeout from food or shutting all the lights off or something like that. And from those auspicious beginnings, timeout came to be used as the leading approach to pre-adolescent discipline. So if someone said to me, you know, isn't timeout, giving a kid timeout better than spanking her? I would say, yeah, probably. And for that matter, spanking her is better than shooting her, but that's not much of an argument for spanking. In other words, timeout, like spanking, are both ways of making kids suffer to teach them a lesson. The question isn't which of these punitive techniques we prefer. It's whether we want to continue doing things to children with rewards or punishments of any kind, or whether we want to try to talk about how we can work with children to solve problems and help them become good people.
I want to ask you more about what parents can do instead of timeouts and be very specific, but we need to take a quick break. Folks, don't go away. We're speaking with Alfie Kohn, the author of Unconditional Parenting, and we'll be right back after the short break. You're listening to Aha Parenting, where we share the secrets of happy parents. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Markham, and we're talking today with Alfie Kohn, the author of Unconditional Parenting and 11 other books on education and parenting. Alfie, let's talk about what parents can do. Parents in the trenches every day trying to do their best for their kids. They're worried that without timeouts, which they've been using, their kids are going to be out of control, but maybe they see it's not working so well. What would you tell these parents about what to do?
Yeah, this is a question I'm asked often, and for good reason, because here I am pulling the rug out from a number of parents saying the traditional bribe and threat approach not only doesn't work, but it makes things worse. And here's where it gets tricky, because there is no simple recipe. There's no one-size-fits-all. When your kid does this, you should stand here and say the following in this tone of voice. You know, those one-size-fits-all approaches are very popular because they say to parents, you don't have to use most of your own judgment. Just do what an expert says. But the reality is that each situation and each child and relationship between child and parent may call for a different specific response. In some cases, it may be saying nothing and being patient and just giving your child love and waiting for this to pass. In other cases, if a child, hits somebody, then you have to intervene, but you have to do so in a way that is gentle but pointed, and that gets across the message, not that hitting is bad, but why hitting is bad. If you give a child a timeout for hitting, then you've taught children the lesson that it's all about self-interest. The only reason not to hit is because if you're caught, you'll suffer. So the child learns, next time I hit when my mom isn't looking. With each of the possible issues, there's a range of possible responses. And once we have asked the key question, is the problem really with my child, or is it with my need for compliance? So if a child is hitting, I think, yes, that's something where we definitely have to stop and make it clear why that's a problem and work with the child patiently, sometimes over years, to understand that. But if the problem is, how am I going to get my kid, my 10-year-old, to clean his room if I can't use rewards or punishments, then I think the problem may be with what we're asking. Why does the child have to keep his room, the only place on the planet that's his, up to your specifications? And we have to be willing at least to rethink our requests in some cases, rather than skipping to the question of how do I get my kid to do it. In other cases, sometimes the solution is to bring the child into the decision-making. I tell a story in my book and DVD called Unconditional Parenting about when my daughter was in preschool and was having a lot of trouble getting ready for preschool in the morning. And I was nagging her, and it was becoming a problem. And, I thought about, okay, there's the usual doing to approaches where we threaten a consequence or promise her a doggy biscuit if she's on time for the next X mornings. But, I'm raising a child here. I'm not paper training a puppy. So what I did instead is to sit down, not in the morning when we're rushed, but at a quiet time when we're in a good mood and have some time in an evening, and say, it's taking a long time in the morning, and I'm not sure this is working well for any of us because we're all getting stressed out. What do you think we can do? Now, that may lead to various responses, and it almost doesn't matter what the child comes up with if it's reasonable, even if it seems silly. The important thing is that the child was asked rather than told. The child learned my voice and opinions and ideas matter here. I'm not just being manipulated, even nicely, by the parent. Now, in my case, what happened is my daughter Abigail said, well, it's taking me a long time to get dressed, so I guess I should just wear my clothes to bed. And, okay, why not? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what she did for approximately the next 7 years. And it worked beautifully. But again, the lesson here is not, go throw away your pajamas. The lesson here is one way of working with kids to solve problems instead of bribing and threatening them into obedience is to elicit their ideas and suggestions, and if they don't work, then we revisit it, come back and talk about it again. Again, it's not one size fits all, even for that problem, much less the array of issues that face us as parents, because I know as a parent of 2 children, it's often challenging, and we sometimes just seem to want compliance. We were asking, how do I get them out of bed, into bed, out of the bath, into the bath, out of the car, into the car? But with each thing we do, we have to be keeping in mind, how is this interaction, this intervention, how is what I'm doing or not doing, saying as opposed to asking or whatever, likely to help my child become the kind of person that I want him or her to be over the long haul.
What I love about that story about Abigail is that she really learned so much from that. She learned not only that her voice is important, but that she can look at an area of her life that's stressing her out, right, and solve the problem. Come up with ideas to solve it. And what a tremendous thing for kids to learn how to problem solve and have their parents help to walk through that process.
Right, and that's exactly what's missing when instead we just treat kids like pets and say, honey, if you're on time for the next 4 mornings, I'll buy you that teddy bear we saw on the store window, or you'll get an extra dessert. Or conversely, if you're late one more time, here's what I'm going to take away from you. Right. Not only is that stuff disrespectful and controlling and not likely to work in the long run, but it, as you point out, it deprives them of a possible opportunity to learn how to solve problems.
One of the reasons that there's no one-size-fits-all answer is that every kid is going to come up with different answers to the dilemma of the moment, right, if they're allowed to participate in the solution.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one reason. Another reason is a lot has to do with, a child can do the same action. 10 children can do the same action for 10 different reasons. Let's say a kid comes, you put your daughter to bed and she pops out of the room in 2 minutes, and you put her to bed again, and again she comes right back out of the room. We have to first of all realize that rewarding kids for staying in bed all night or punishing them for getting out just makes kids feel unsafe in coming to you. Mm-hmm. But when you say, so what should I do? It depends on the reason. I get worried when parents or the people who advise parents use the word behavior too much. What are we going to do about this child's behavior? I think, because if we're focused on the actions that you can see and measure, then you're missing the child who engages in the behaviors, and you're likely to just use rewards and punishments because they exist to try to make behaviors start or stop or change. So I'm not just interested in what the child is doing, but how come? Why might a child? I do this, with groups when I speak on these issues. Why might a child not be staying in bed and keep coming out of her room? Well, there are many possibilities. She's scared. There's a monster in the closet. She's hungry. She's not tired yet. You have to rethink the bedtime. There's stuff going on at school that's, in her mind. She can't shut off. Or she just wants more time with her parents. She doesn't get enough. Each of those explanations calls for a completely different course of action. Mm-hmm. And in fact, maybe not a single course of action. Maybe your child's concern about what's going on at school leads you to solve that differently than when my kid has concerns about school. But I cannot emphasize too strongly, whenever you use rewards, including praise, or punishments, including timeout, you are pretending that why the child is doing this doesn't matter. That's why these programs to help make kids stay asleep, by systematically delaying your re-entry into the bedroom, or getting kids potty trained. Those programs are not about children. They're about behaviors. And to that extent, we miss the whole picture and we miss the child.
I keep hearing you, there's an under-refrain about the relationship and everything that you say. It's all about taking your child seriously as an individual and really having a relationship so that you can see what's going on with him.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And, if kids feel unsafe, if they feel like they're only loved and appreciated and only get attention when they do what the parent wants, then they're not going to come to us when they're having trouble with their temper, or having trouble with peers making fun of them, or having trouble because they slipped and did something they're not proud of. Mm-hmm. They need to know that we're there for them, that we will listen, that we will not be defensive, and we'll be willing to reconsider what we did and sometimes apologize if we handled a situation badly the night before. Mm-hmm. They need what matters. The relationship is what matters far more than whether the baby sleeps through the night, or the toddler pees in the potty at the right schedule, or the little boy makes us proud with his good manners when company comes over, or whether the homework gets done. All of these, or spills his chocolate milk, these things will all be forgotten after a few years. The question is, will we have raised our children in a way where they want to spend time with us when they have a choice? vast majority of discipline solutions, I think, make that less likely.
What a great question to ask parents of teenagers and kids in their 20s. Yeah.
Right. But I'm asking it of parents of young kids to look ahead.
Yes,
what kind of relationship they want to have and expect to have with their kids when they are in their 20s.
And maybe the behavior that we take for granted once kids get to be 11 or 12 and they get mouthy and disrespectful, maybe it's related to some of the decisions that were made earlier about discipline.
Or the extent to which they continue to feel disrespected by us. First of all, I mean, when I hear people complaining their kids are disrespectful, my first question is, what do you mean by disrespectful? Because sometimes what parents mean by respecting them, the parents, just means mindless obedience, not real respect. But then the second thing I want to ask is, to what extent do your children feel respected by you? And there's all kinds of ways where we treat our kids in a way we would never dream of treating an adult. You know, the great parenting theorist Chaim Ginott told a story years ago about how we talk to a kid who, you know, forgets her raincoat again, and just berating the kid. What, again, you forgot it? What's the matter with you? How many times do I have to tell you? You'd forget your own head if it wasn't attached. One of these days I'm not going to be around to blah, 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 blah. You know, but what happens, he says, when your friend, an adult who comes over and starts to leave without her umbrella? Do we talk to her like that? We don't dream of it. We say, oh, I think you forgot this. The things we think we can get away with, the blatant disrespect, we demand that kids never interrupt us when we're talking, but think nothing about interrupting them. And I could go on and on with other examples.
Let me just ask you one more question about this, because I can hear some parents out there thinking to themselves, well, my son knows I love him. I'm not criticizing him. I'm criticizing his behavior.
Right.
What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, as Thomas Gordon, another one of my mentors, put it, and I'm paraphrasing here, saying, I love you, I just don't love your behavior, doesn't seem very convincing if the kid keeps hearing disapproval of all of these behaviors. At some point, the kid wonders, who is this elusive me you claim to love when all I get is disrespect and disapproval. It is an important distinction to get across. We want to make sure our kids know that they themselves are loved. But the key point of the hypothetical parent's assumption you just mentioned is the assumption that kids know that we love them. The reality, there was a very interesting study just a couple of years ago, and then an update that came out just this year, which I wrote about in the New York Times, about how when kids are raised conditionally, with conditional affection, when they're given rewards or praise, when they do well, and when love seems to be withdrawn when they're misbehaved. Sometimes those techniques can work temporarily to get the compliance, but these researchers asked young adults whether they experienced things this way. And a significant number of them said that they felt that when they got good grades, or when they did well in sports, or when they were really nice to others, or when they hid their negative feelings, that their parents loved them a lot more. And it turned out that there were serious psychological implications to that. It didn't go well for them. And in many cases, these young adults resented their parents, as I was saying before about relationships. But the key point with respect to what you just asked is, I'll bet almost all of the parents, had you asked them, would have said exactly what you said. Well, of course I love my child unconditionally. She knows that. It doesn't matter what our intent is or what we make of the situation. All that matters in the long run in terms of predicting the outcome is how the child feels. Whether the child feels loved no matter what. And you can have, dotted all your I's and crossed your T's, and your conscience is clear that you made it, you said 50 times, honey, we love you, we just don't love what you're doing. If the child feels, I have to earn my parents' affection, either by being a star who's impressive or by being well-behaved and doing what I'm told, then you've got a bad outcome. And that's one of the things I always recommend about little and big stuff for parents. Get in the habit of imagining how things look from the child's point of view. Your intentions, your beliefs about the interaction don't matter. What matters is how it looks to the child.
That's so beautifully said. I know we've kept you a little over time, but I'm so appreciative, and I think that's the perfect comment with which to wrap up our interview. Before we let you go, Alfie, can you tell us how folks can get their hands on your books and also find you online?
Thank you for asking. It's the same answer to both questions. First of all, I have two websites that interlock. One is called unconditionalparenting.com. And the other one is my home website, which is my name, Alfie, A-L-F as in Frank, I-E-K-O-H-N, Cohn.org. And there parents can find not only information about my books, but also a whole mess of free articles, information about DVDs and other stuff as well.
Wonderful. Alfie, thank you so much for joining us today. This was terrific.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay. Have a great day.
You too.